So, Flesh and Blood is officially coming to Japan this week. Part the Mistveil's world premiere heralds in, pardon the pun, that game to that market. And it's no small deal. Not only is Japan one of the larger TCG markets globally, but they also have a culture of competitive gaming that will certainly challenge the rest of us across the globe. So today, I'm joined by Elliot Tan, who I believe is uniquely qualified to offer us a perspective on this, both as a highly decorated player, but also as a caster, and a leading member in the Asianic region's larger community. A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando. Hey there, my Flesh and Blood friends. Welcome back to a super special Go Again, a Fabulous Cast. We're here with one of the nicest dudes that I've met in Flesh and Blood, and also a hilarious man. You can see he's laughing. He's laughing right there. But fundamentally, I met him in Queenstown. He's an absolute joy to be around, and we've tried at least 2 or 3 times to get a cast in person together. Didn't work, but I'm super glad to have you here. So how are you doing? How are you doing, my friend?
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for having me. It's been an excellent time. I'm all the way back in Singapore. Thanks for scheduling this. I know it's hard to get the time zones
That's
to
right.
sync up. We're like 15 hours apart, so it's always crazy. But a very exciting time for Flesh and Blood, and a very exciting time for myself. Next weekend, I'll be in Tokyo. We'll be doing the world premiere and the Calling Tokyo for part the Mistveil. So just overall, I'm just giddy with excitement, right, for this upcoming set that's so Asian centric and so close to my heart.
Oh, that's awesome. And you know what I realized when I was doing the intro is I was assuming that everyone knew who you were, but this is Elliot Tan, and he is not only a big part of Flesh and Blood, he's a really good player in his own right. You and I actually played at the Celebrational. Our match was I was on Aracne ASC in the whatever they called it, the 100 points or less blitz. I forget what they called it.
Yeah. The Underdog Blitz. That's
Underdog.
right.
There we go. So it was Underdog Blitz, and you were on Vincent.
Uh,
And
yes.
I specifically remember you being like, how the hell do people do this? And we were kind of fuddling through, and it was a great game. You destroyed me, but it was an absolutely phenomenal experience. And again, awesome dude. But like I said, great player in his own right, made his way to the Pro Tour LA, where I think we hugged there. At least we like did the elbow. I don't remember specifically, but
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I think we were like, I was like super busy. My
yeah,
first time playing at a high tier event. I really wanted to make it to day 2.
right.
I managed to get there, so
Which you did.
that was
Yeah.
phenomenal. Yeah, I was so excited. Like just the thought of flying overseas to play a card game. My background, I'm not a very competitive card game player. I've dabbled in, other TCGs before, Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, a lot of the online stuff. But I think this is the first TCG where I'm really committing uh, a lot of time and resources in order to develop some sort of achievement and even just to be a part of the community, right? Like doing things like OneTwoJuice, our YouTube comedy channel, and hanging out with other content creators. That's like phenomenal for me. Just the idea
Mhm.
to be part of something bigger than the game itself is something I've always dreamed of as a child, but I guess I get to live it as an adult.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, fair enough. And, so again, I kind of alluded to before, we failed to meet many times, and that's because
Yeah.
you made day 2, right? So you didn't have any time. So we weren't able to meet up in Pro Tour, but you made this happen. And I actually want to thank you for being flexible, because for those folks who are on the other side of the screen, we were supposed to meet about 25 minutes ago, something like that. But my son is finally at the age where he's realizing it's still light outside when he's trying to go to bed, and he's like, that doesn't compute. Right. So Elliot, you were very flexible, so thank you for that.
Oh no, my pleasure, my
and
pleasure.
and, and to expand on that, you're not only a good player, and you're right, you've actually donned an LSS jersey before in Phuket, and you will be doing so again in Japan, which is kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the major talk of this. So can you just summarize for us, again, on other sides of the ocean or on this side of the screen, what does it mean for you as someone who lives in that region to have Flesh and Blood coming to Japan? Like, what's the impact of that? It seems pretty big to me, but what are your thoughts?
Wow, I mean, in Japan, they're traditionally known as such a powerhouse for card games, right? I mean, it's not always things like Magic. They have a lot of like local card games like Yu-Gi-Oh, Vanguard, and whatnot. And a lot of the best players in whatever game they play, they tend to rise to the top. Now, when we look at Asia as a region, most of the times, like calling Taipei, even calling Phuket that just happened, right? You'll see that the players who really try to gather at these callings tend to come from Oceania or Southeast Asia, Taipei. That's always been the case for like what the past 3 to 4 years, ever
Hmm.
since organized play has really been stimulated on the ground. Uh, so having a new entrant, a powerhouse country that's been traditionally great at these games, coming in and now getting opportunities, to play at the bigger stage, I think that's going to shake up the region a lot. A lot of the top eight names that have kind of cemented themselves, people like Hayden Dale, right?
Hmm.
Who we know because they've participated a lot in the regional metas. You have your Nick Butchers as well, who's made multiple top eights. Those names keep repeating themselves, and I wonder what will happen once we start to see a lot of Japanese players start to do better and better as the game develops there. Uh, I'm super happy. It also means that there's more opportunities for us to maybe hit up Japan, like at the end of the year with Worlds in Osaka. So,
Yeah.
beautiful country. I can never complain about going to Japan, man.
Yeah, you know, it's always been one of my personal. This is no one caring except for me and you, right? But it's always been one of my personal dreams to go to Japan. The company I work for, we have a lot of Japanese customers. I always was hoping I'd get a trip out of it. But maybe Flesh and Blood is going to be the one that, after 20 years of work and all that, finally delivers me to go there. That I'm it, I it's a really fascinating thing, and again, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this, because the impact to that slice, I don't know if that's the right term, of the
Hmm.
globe, right?
Yeah.
The vertical slice, if you were to lay out the map
Hmm.
and slice it, I think the impact's huge. So what do you think? You mentioned a lot of the big names, right? What do you think that ends up looking like in 1 year, 2 years? What's the footprint look like?
Yeah, I mean, even today, when we look at things like Worlds, right? Teams like Team Blue Pitch, they've cemented
Mm-hmm.
themselves within their region as being like really, really strong, just coming out of Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm.
We have players in Thailand who are also developing their names, like Vespa, who did super well at Calling Phuket, right? He brought out that Prism deck and just like obliterated everyone during the Swiss rounds. I hope to see that with the spotlight um, coming to Asia, at least during this period of time, we'll start to see the region develop as a whole, not just as one big cluster. Like, I think usually Asia and Oceania, we get kind of lumped together as that side of the world, like the southern hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm really hoping that the individual countries start to get representation. Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Taipei, Taiwan, I guess, Hong Kong, Australia, New Zealand. There are a lot of great names coming up from these regions, but it feels so homogenized, right? In the sense that when we talk about what's happening on the other side of the world, and for good reason as well, right? It's hard to get the news. I don't think there's a lot of news coming out of us. And as content creators, I think one of my goals for the year really is to shed a bit more light on how that happens. But that's why I value these kind of conversations so much with content creators from the other side, right, from the northern hemisphere,
Mm-hmm.
who are willing to engage and say like, hey, what's the situation that's happening over there? Who are the players that we should be noting on? Interestingly enough, one of the reasons why they brought me in for calling Phuket, and they were very generous to do so, um, was that they felt that I could have given insights into the players on the ground, people who may not be familiar to the wider audience, to the international audience who's looking in. But I've kind of, I play with these people all the time, whether it's during the times of the pandemic when we're all on Discord. And in this time zone, playing on Discord allowed us to communicate with people from Hong Kong, Taiwan. It's like what? It's like an hour difference for us
Mm-hmm.
at max. So it's really not that difficult. Um, and even today, just like traveling around, we speak very similar languages. I'm very privileged that in Singapore I get to speak both English and Mandarin, and I know a few dialects within Chinese culture itself. that allows for a much easier communication avenue between us and some of the um, Asian countries that don't speak English. So
Hmm.
it's been a really good ride, and uh, just kind of like to summarize my point, like what it looks like in 1 to 2 years time, I think you'll start to see a lot of teams forming up representing stronger parts of their countries, right? I think there'll be a lot more dynamic growth teams, like what Blue Pitch is doing, set such a strong precedent for other teams to pop up. And I'm hearing a lot of rumblings on the ground of people wanting to do that as the game has shown, after like 5 years of growth. We celebrated it at the celebrational this
Mhm.
year. After 5 years of being cemented in this game, it's showing a lot of promise for people to want to invest their time, their money, their effort into, actually getting something out of it. So I'm very, very hopeful for this.
Well, it seems like it's on a great path, and I think a lot of folks can probably soak in your excitement. I am certainly from the other side of this screen, and hopefully they are as well. So, what do you see as one of the things you mentioned was the teams forming by country. Over there is at least a perceived level to a North American like myself, a perceived level of tribalism. Is those teams forming? How do you see that gelling together? Do you see any risks there, or do you see it actually being a net positive?
I see it as a net positive. It's not so much like it's not as isolatory as I'm describing it, I
Mm-hmm.
suppose. A lot of the teams are just, they're practice houses. They are people who are willing to share ideas with each other. But as far as I know, and from my own perspective and what I've seen, um, there is a lot of talk. There's a lot of sharing between the regions as well. No one's really that far from each other as with the advent of the internet, with the advent of things like Talishar, where we're able to like play these games together. Um, Funny enough, a lot of times because Singapore is like a central hub for Asia in terms of travel, when the Flesh and Blood players stop by before they transit to some other part of the country, right? Or if they're flying internationally, uh, we just hang out and we play great games together. And I think people are sharing tech to a certain degree, but everyone likes keeping their cards close to their heart. So it's good that teams form together in order to ideate and to innovate. But it's also good that the community is very positive in the ability to scrim and share with each other, right? Like no one's that afraid of like, hey, let's play some games and talk about the game. In that sense, I think it's net positive. And it might even bring out that competitive spirit in each other. I think once you start cementing brand names and teams, people do like that prestige. This is one of those games, in the modern era of
Mm-hmm.
organized play that really feels very prestigious compared to other games. The idea of collecting gold foils, the idea of like racking up your PTIs. There are a lot of narratives out there that have already given to people like Brody Spurlock, who've just like high performance players throughout like the years, right? And I think people love chasing that. It's not something which every game in the market is making available to us. So I can see the gravitation towards it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, maybe a off kilter, pseudo unique question to you, but I think you're very uniquely qualified to answer this. Um, as you're very aware, different because and to be clear, I believe you're very uniquely qualified to answer this because of your background in multiple languages, multiple cultures, and your experience over there, right? One of the things I appreciate about the concept of I'm going to use air quotes, but sort of diversity, right?
Hmm.
Diversity isn't necessarily diversity of race, of color, of that, but it's also diversity of background and of culture. And the reason I appreciate diversity on my teams is that people bring different things to the table in terms of how they problem solve. So, how do you, and this is a very open ended question, so I get it, right? But do you think that bringing the Japanese to the table brings a different approach to Flesh and Blood, um, as opposed to what we've seen, traditionally North American, European, a little bit of South America, huge contingent in, the Oceania region. Do you think that they'll change how Flesh and Blood is approached, or do you think that they'll fit in and just kind of go for the throat with again, air quotes, go for the throat within the way that things are done? What do you see? How do you see it changing the face of really the game as a whole?
That's a great question. Um, I think like in terms of diversity, and I'm using this as quite a loose terminology around it, right? Every region that I've played in, or the play groups I've played in across Southeast Asia, the metas are always so different. Like Hong Kong for me has always, for the longest time, been like Dash country.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a very aggressive meta, but they love their dashes. It's just kind of something which everyone takes as a narrative front. You look at the top players, they're dash players, traditionally dash players. In Singapore, I can tell you that uh, the aggressive meta, like people just gravitate towards aggressive decks.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the older meta, like people still playing their aggressive decks because that's what they loved. We didn't really look towards um, the West as like a benchmark, like, oh, this is the best deck. People would show up at their locals and still bring decks that they felt more affinity with. That's just how I think players respond to this game as more of like a play style initiated game as opposed to always playing quote unquote the best deck. Uh, I can share with you like a little adage which
Yeah, please.
we kind of talk about in Singapore, right? It's that no matter how bad the matchup, a good pilot can inch those margins almost to a level where it's comfortable to play it, right? It in the old Prism meta where Viserai and Chane were just like horrendously bad for you, a good Prism pilot would be able to skew that matchup maybe a little bit to like a 55-45, right? Or at least that's what we believe in. A very proficient player could make very difficult matchups a little bit more winnable. Or you could capitalize on the fact that people felt that it was an overly favored deck to play into. And I feel like that's very true. Um, and I won't say this like an Asian mindset, but it's pretty predominant in Singapore in particular. It's that we it's always weird when people tell us that's a bad deck to play, and it makes you all the more want to prove someone wrong. That's just how stubborn we are on the ground. And I'm not talking about this when it comes to just card games. I mean, this is just us when it comes to work and it comes to school. It's like, don't go study the arts. It's like, I'll prove to you, I'm gonna get a like a first class honors or something in that degree. It's just part of the cultural aspect, which I think spills into every part of your life. In Malaysia as well, like they love their brutes. One of their nationals players is the brute queen, Nydia, and she's known to play Rhinar and Levia just all the time. And she won nationals last year, even though it was Lexi country, right? You remember Lexi meta? Yeah, everyone remembers
I
Lexi
mean,
meta. Um,
nationals last year was like late summer. Yeah, that was like height of Lexi. Maybe even fall, but either way, it was that was height of Lexi slinging arrows at everybody. Yeah.
yeah, and Nydia was doing some crazy things on brute. So as far as I've seen it, uh, every region has kind of developed their own local meta, and it always centers around, I think, some of the best players in the game, right? Where Japan goes with this, it's going to be quite interesting because they've always been innovators in other
Mm-hmm.
games. When I think of their time in Magic the Gathering, a lot of the I wouldn't say quirky decks, but like the decks and the way they tune them for very specific matchups, that level of innovation, I think is just so interesting. And I'm very sure that it will not look anything like what we've seen within our regions. And even if it does, it's probably got its own flavor to it as well. Uh, I'm always excited. I don't think any region by itself is homogenous per
Mm-hmm.
se. I look at the West and the kind of Twitter discourse that we have all the time. No one can really agree on what's the best deck until it becomes statistically problematic, as people will say, quote unquote, right? Um, so um, I'm fully excited. These guys have shown up. We had a top eight player, I believe, or at least inched towards top eight last year, a Japanese player at Worlds itself. So that was absolutely wonderful to watch. And I can only imagine once they start opening up, once there's a higher adoption rate in Japan, uh, this region in particular is going to have a tougher time thinking about callings, right? Flying for events, knowing that you're faced up against a new region who's coming in with their own ideas. You got to account for one more variable, and that's never easy.
Oh no, that's a very insightful. Oh, that's an you man. You just started peeling the onion, my friend. So yeah, they're making a big bet on Japan, and
Mhm.
because of the just inherent intelligence of that region and scariness of that region, yeah, you actually could. I didn't even think about that. You're actually putting a barrier. It's like, well, I'm not going to fly 5 hours or 6 hours or whatever it might be. That's a very fair point. I hadn't considered that.
It's actually very and for us today, like I can tell you that if I wasn't casting Calling Phuket, flying to play for Phuket would have been a no-brainer, right? It's so
Mm-hmm.
difficult. I think about it, it's like, man, how hard is it for an American or a European to come to Phuket during this period of time, just after Pro Tour LA? Um, what are the odds that they'll show up? I think only a couple of recognizable faces from the US came down. Josh Lau was there, and he brought his Dorinthea deck. But I would have thought of it as like, hey, I should play in this calling because my shot at hitting top eight is against players who I'm very familiar with. I've played with these players hundreds of times in my local metas, even in my regional metas before. Nothing should really surprise me that much in terms of skill expression and in terms of what their inclinations are. But once you start getting a country which, I mean, is a new variable in this year or so, I think you'll have all these question marks of like, what are they actually playing there? Because we haven't honestly connected with any of them within this game yet. And I'm sure it's only a matter of time, but for this first inception year, that's going to be a barrier for me figuring out like how do I prepare for that meta. I don't think it's going to deter me as much from playing because I love that competitive element to it,
Mm-hmm.
and being caught off guard is just another learning opportunity. But still, it's going to be like a big head scratcher. It's like, how do I hedge my bets in how I pack these 80 cards in, right? Do I need to account for something which is beyond my frame of reference?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you only have what 11 cards by the time you pack in your null
Briefly.
rune or whatever it is, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So and with part the Mistveil coming out, it's a new set. It looks quite complicated as a set as well, to say the least, compared to heavy hitters, which I think is a lot more. Um, you can't don't quote me on this, but it's like a
Well,
lot
you're
more
on video,
beginner
my friend.
friendly. That's true. That's true. I think heavy hitters is a lot more beginner friendly, even compared to something like
Absolutely.
Red Knight. So part of Mistveil is a much it looks much more interactive as a set, right? In the sense that a lot of instants that it can be played. There are these transcend cards that don't block and stuff. The interactions are pretty wild when you think about the decision tree and the web it unfolds. Um, a set like that coming into national season with the Japanese players getting their hands on it for the first time, and then we'll move into Worlds with a third set. I'm hoping it's the Arcane set coming out at the end.
You're
We're looking
hoping? Oh, we can't be
oh
friends anymore. Oh, I'm just kidding.
I'm like, when that happens, a lot of these wild interactions and the way you have to think about your deck building process
Mm-hmm.
going into a prestigious event like Worlds, it's always so risky, right? In some ways, you have to account for factors that you're not entirely sure makes sense now that a region that I don't know if I'll get enough content out that region even, that's in English, something that I'll be able to understand. Uh, I'll pitch this to you, right? Like when the US market and the content creators, the very good players like Ria Adams, for example, when she does deck text, it really is insight into what the region is thinking about in some ways, right?
Mm.
They're explaining their thought process, and I understand that because it's in English, it's broadcaster, and there's a lot of spotlight on these players. So going into Worlds, you kind of have an idea of how they're thinking, of how they're managing the meta over there. But That's why I worry about Japan, because I won't know anything that they're saying. They
Mhm.
might show me the deck list, but without going through gameplay footage, without being able to communicate and pick their brains on what's happening, that could be an interesting time for us to live in, where a whole new meta is developing without our knowledge and without our ability to even go deeper into that psychology.
Yeah, I think it's a very fair point, and it's a culture. On top of that, it's a culture who's very well respected for their ability to engineer
Oh
and
yeah.
to create, which is kind of the same thing as terms of engineering. I actually wanted to throw an adage out there. So when the top 8 for ProQuest was being announced in LA, I believe it was doesn't matter. It was a side event we were all in, and I was sitting with a bunch of people, and we were waiting for the next round to be called, and they were announcing the top 8. And as they were doing so, they were doing this person, this country, this person, this country, and we were counting the number of countries, and it was 7 different countries, and we were like, that is so
Mhm.
awesome. And then I made the joke to the folks around me. I was like, so you know what it's going to look like next year, right? Japan, 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 Belgium, Japan, Japan, Japan. And they all laughed. And then they're like, huh. Right? So it was a joke, but I was kind of like, oh yeah, that's actually um, kind of relevant. And I do want to throw that out to our European friends, because I've heard a lot of barbs thrown. Is like, look, it's Europe versus. Though I saw a couple tweets on that. It's like, oh, Europe versus the U.S. How many of us got in the top 8? And I was like, hold on. The folks from the U.S. were super excited that there was diversity, and the folks from Europe are like, haha, it's all Europe, not the U.S. And I was like, well, now who's the a-hole? But either way, but all jokes aside, I think there's a lot of respect, and I think I'm hearing it in your voice as well. And I don't want to use
Mhm.
the word fear, but um, again, I think it's out of respect, right, for the power
Mhm.
that potentially comes out of that region, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. I think if anything, I'm excited for the fact that a fresh voice, so to speak, is coming into the game to give us a new perspective on how to think about card games in general. This game has, in the short span of 5 years, I think seen very interesting shifts in terms of thinking about the game. It's not just about, even from the time of like Hamilton coming up with the Bullender deck all the way till now, the question mark of like what is value in
Mm-hmm.
Flesh and Blood has changed so much. Even the idea of like power spikes, right? Like sets like Monarch and those powerful heroes from then are phasing out. We're slowly seeing a lot of the FaB 1.0 heroes kind of leave the ecosystem slowly but surely. Dash is almost on her way out as well, right? She's at like
Oh, that's going to
800
be a
plus
sad
points.
day.
It
Oof.
is, right?
Yeah.
Um, and FaB 2.0 has such a different kind of power level. The way I've described it is that there are a lot more of hoops to jump through in order to utilize that power. If you look at the Misveil as an example, all 3 heroes, they have pretty cool static effects, like -1 in your first spectral shield attack, or banish cards that defend the stealth cards. But the real power is unlocked behind jumping through a hoop of
Mm-hmm.
making chi. FaB 2.0, a lot of their heroes, like Riptide, require you to think about like what your deck is trying to achieve, and then play this little mini game with yourself in order to achieve maximum value. So as the game evolves and the players evolve in terms of thinking, when you add a new voice like Japan into the equation, I think you get very dynamic conversations, and the growth mindset, the ability to think about the theory of this game, I think just comes so fun. And as a competitive player, I love that. I need that in my life. That's what motivates me to get better and better, because you see someone out there thinking about it and go like, oh, if I thought about that first, I would have such an edge at this competition. I'm sure
Mm.
Michael Hamilton, when he made the Bull Ender deck, he had such an edge because he was thinking about the game on the different axes
Right.
from everyone else. Yeah,
Oh yeah, I mean, he was playing a different game when he went into. I mean, maybe not him himself, but in terms of what he had designed, he was on a whole different tier of game when he went into Worlds in 2022. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, I know I'm going on a lot about it, but I cannot understate how happy I am that Japan is getting this game localized. There are some incredible players that we've met. We met Yui when she was in Japan.
Right.
She's such a great ambassador for the game as well.
Body weight was crushing on the Yui. I was worried. Yui is like the national treasure of like the card game scene in Japan, right? I'm crushing her under my weight. But then I'm thinking about Yui's mom.
Yui's mom had that moment,
Who's up against the side?
the Japanese cartoon, the soul come out the mouth one.
I might have heard the sound of cracking ribs from Yui.
It's a wonderful country where the ecosystem of trading card games is apparent on the ground. So that could do a lot as well in terms of for me, just the idea of like collecting, trading, buying and selling cards. That secondary market is well taken care of in Japan.
Yeah, fair enough. So this kind of random question I'm just coming up with. When you go to Japan, because you're going to be there, I assume twice, right, for this and then Worlds. I assume. You don't have to say anything confirming anything. That's not what I'm asking for. It's far out. But I assume you'll be there in whatever facet, right? What do you hope to see? Like if you go there and you see, I mean, we know that Calling Tokyo is almost sold out. Actually, I saw today it was like 70 spots left or something like that. That's probably not the right number, but it's close, right? What do you hope to see? What do you think? Let me rephrase it. What will be when you boots on the ground, right? What's your measure of success as to whether not just people being there, but whether it's going to stick? What do you think will be the telling indicator?
I think that's a really good question. I think there are two factors that I'm really looking towards because I keep my eye pretty close on, I would say, how the LGS system sort of like works. In order for players to thrive, you need strong LGSs, and for LGSs to thrive, you need more players. So I think the first metric is seeing the number of like the buying and selling that's going on within like the Japanese LGSs that are there. From my understanding, there are no external vendors at this event, right? And it's kind of like a Japanese thing.
Well, it's like a Japanese law I saw, right? That you couldn't even trade on the floor. Yeah.
Exactly, right? So I think that level of the volume of interactions, right, between the vendors and the players, I think is a very good indicator. How much they're willing to buy and invest into the game tends to be a very strong indicator of how much they want this game to thrive. That's number one. But number two, I'm hoping to see that the floor just has a lot of new players coming in. They've been putting a lot of effort. LSS has been putting a lot of effort working with a lot of the LGSs on the ground for the past week. We're recording this on a weekend, but the past week has essentially been people doing like the learn FaB, like Road to Tokyo learn FaB components. So I think they got the Blitz decks earlier this week in Japanese, so that the new players can,
which set do you know? Was it heavy hitters?
From MST. It's from MST itself.
Oh.
So the players are holding the Japanese Blitz decks already.
I know I'm interrupting you, but MST looks super complicated as the set to introduce into a country a market, right? You're introducing a super complicated set into a market. That's kind of ballsy, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. But they also have the Japanese IRL welcome decks as well. So I think there's like two axes that they're doing this on. Yeah, it's just that they want to make it special, I guess. Getting the MST Blitz decks into the stores earlier, and I'm not sure if they're don't quote me on this, but like I'm not sure whether they're playing with them just yet. But I've seen a lot of the content creators and on the ground people in Japan holding these decks already, right? So they have some of the Japanese cards readily available.
Well, it would make sense, right? On Monday, well, at least Monday for me, we got we got the triple spoiler article of the pre-con dumps. That would make sense. Why? Because they're like, well, people in the world can read Japanese. They're going to know what the cards read, right? So that actually tracks with what that actually makes sense. I didn't know that, so thank you for telling me that. But that actually tracks. That makes sense why we just got hey, we're holding an event in Kyoto tomorrow. We got to get this out. That makes sense. So
yeah. So it was really cool for that. And I feel like if on the floor itself, when we're at World Premiere Tokyo and Calling Tokyo, if there's an influx of new players who just want to participate, just want to crack packs at World Premiere or join the calling just so that they can, take a shot at opening these new packs and playing some games, to me, that's a very strong indicator uh, of like on the ground sentiment. I'm hoping that it isn't just a flood of overseas participants, even though it's so cool that every time we go for callings, you get to see all your friends from around the world.
Right.
But I'm really hoping that the split of international visitors versus on the ground folks is somewhere around the 50-50 mark, right? Like ratio wise. That to me would be very, very strong. Realistically, I imagine it's still like 60 to 70% of us from all around the world gathering in Tokyo.
That's probably reasonable.
That's probably very reasonable. And to me, that's still good enough. But what would give me like just like my expectations would be blown off the roof if it was like straight down the line 50-50. Because I don't know if you've noticed this, but or maybe it's not happening so much in the US, but in Asia, in all our Asian callings, usually there are a couple of Japanese store owners who will come down to the booths and just buy out a bunch of stock. That's
they're getting ahead of the game.
They're getting ahead of the game, or they're seeing it as like, we don't want to miss out on buying stuff like gold foils, older gold foils, and like stocking them in our shops. Like that's what people in the market in Japan are still buying out. I know that, and they're buying it at pretty good prices as well.
Do they have a TCG player equivalent? I'm guessing based on the laws. I'm guessing no. I'm guessing you have to buy it through the stores, but I don't know.
Well, this is probably true in other games, but I'm not sure about FaB itself. But generally, people trust the LGSs more than transacting on the ground with other players, right? If you want to move your cards away, you want to, just get some cash back, it's always best to do through the stores because, the stores are very transparent with their prices. People just trust that system a lot more.
I see.
Which is very different from around the region. In Singapore, I think no one buys singles from the shops, right? Everyone just goes
TCG
like
player or whatever your equivalent is.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. It's just not the same on how it works here.
Interesting.
I'm very happy, to see like more players who are Japanese either trying to pick up the game or who have picked up the game before, but now have localized cards to play with and just showing up at World Premiere.
Got it. Well, that's very interesting. I'm super excited about this. I really wanted to go. The price tag was high and, family and jobs and stuff. But I so want some Japanese cards. So it's going to happen at some point. And that was going to lead my question. Are you going to be taking your packs in English or Japanese? I know you speak a lot of languages. What's your call?
I'm picking them up in Japanese for sure.
There you go.
It's I just wanna try to crack some other language cards. It was very fun during History Pack 1 when you were doing the Black Label versions, just opening them in different languages. I have this little peeve of mine where in my Blitz decks in particular, where I like having as many different languages inside of them as possible, just for the fun of it. But in this case, I think that the Marvels in Japanese just feels so aesthetic to the theme of the set, right? Like I want to see that Enigma Marvel with the beautiful tapestry, the flowing gowns and whatnot, have that like Japanese language text straight on it. That to me is the dream to collect from this one. I think in terms of playing though, eventually I'll just be buying in English. I want to make sure that I'm not sure about print runs, so don't ask me on this. But it's probably something which you wanna leave it for the Japanese, right? Similarly, how
they'll likely over. I bet they'll over. I don't. I use this with air quotes overprint, but they'll probably overprint the Japanese one to make sure that there's not a constraint there.
Because I'm also sure that people will want to buy it from overseas as well. Like during History Pack 1, there was a lot of demand for these like pieces, right, in different languages, whether it was German or Spanish, overseas as well. So yeah, I'm very sure that there's enough demand and supply there. But yeah, eventually this is just for the novelty of World Premiere next weekend, just to open some cards, have no idea what's going on with them.
Right.
To this very day,
I have to look it up on your phone.
Yeah. It's like they announced like the like card gallery on FaB TCG's
Right.
website itself. So it's really cool that I'm gonna go scroll through and like matching the art pieces and going like, okay, this the effect, and trying to recognize like the keywords in Japanese. That's gonna be fun, to say the least. But long term, no. I think I'll be sticking to my English product as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's super exciting to me, right? So, like I said, I work with a lot of Japanese vendors, and I know a couple phrases like conversational Japanese, but to sit down and read a card, bro, no, like no.
It's a
But
whole different game. It's a whole
I
different
so
game.
want some, right? Um, yeah, man, this is super exciting, and I want to really thank you so much for again taking your Saturday morning, my Friday evening to shoot this. But I really wanted to talk with you before you head out there, because I think this is a major not I think I'm confident this is a major milestone for the game, and I'm really curious from your or I have been curious. You've definitely informed us. I was curious from your perspective what it means not just for Japan and the game, but also specifically your region and accessibility. And one thing you said earlier actually really resonated with you. Like, you see the same names, Hayden Dale, Nick Butcher, right? The names that come up a lot. Uh, Potentially could not be the top eights consistently in a year and a half from now. And that's a very
Yeah.
fascinating concept to approach.
It's that like playing Street Fighter in the arcades and they put in a coin, it's like here comes a new challenger. Yeah, that's the kind of feeling I'm getting. It's like you don't know who's next behind the screen, who's coming for your throne, right? Who's coming to take your titles. Like we don't have that many I would say like that many Asian callings so far. So the names are still getting fresh, but
Hmm.
on the ground we know who the better players are. In Singapore, we have a two times national champion, like back-to-back national champion, Gordon Koch. He's made top eight in a bunch of battle hardens across, but it's hard, right? Because we don't really have that much spotlight on what we're doing as a region just yet. We don't interview these people. We don't really um, have content pieces around them, and that's okay. I think once the region starts developing and as the game grows, you'll find incentives for more content creators to come in and do stuff beyond like what we're doing. Like One2Juice, we're very focused on making skits and we want to make
Hmm.
people laugh and stuff, right? It's not really our place to interview or make these really in-depth, insightful conversations. But I'm very sure that there's going to be people who are going to be interested in that space who can find the time, effort, and creativity to expound upon the local talents. So, as far as I'm concerned, this idea of launching MST in Japan, getting localized, really developing the region, and showing conviction in making the game go to the next level is very, very exciting. It just fills me with so much hope that the competitive level of this game is going to go up, as well as the fact that the adoption rate of this game is going to go up, or there's a concerted effort towards those things.
Oh man, I think that's very, very well said. So, in respect of both yourself and our viewers, I want to move to kind of sunset this because I feel like I feel like I could talk to you for 8 hours, and actually, in some cases, in Queenstown, I think we did actually.
We did. We just sat down, we had wine, and we just kept talking.
Well, I mean, I've got my beer here. We've been sipping on it. You're in the morning there, so you're not in the same boat and well respected. Uh, but either way, I really want to thank you for taking the time here. The perspective of not quite literally the other side of the globe, but kind of is, I think, very well taken. And I really want to encourage everyone to tune in to that. Elliot here is, as I mentioned in the intro, not only a good dude, but he's really funny, and I think he does a really good job, and he's a good player in his own right. So I'm very much looking forward to the cast from. Sorry, shoot! It's next weekend. Next weekend. It's like for you. It's
It's
like you're probably flying out in like 3 days, right?
yeah,
4 days,
I,
maybe.
I yeah, exactly 3 days from now, I'm just doing all my last minute preparation. I'm trying my best to read up all the spoilers as fast as possible because,
Yeah. Well,
um,
hold on to your hold on to your butt, dude. It's coming.
yeah, it's crazy. Like I'm gonna be discovering a lot of the cards on the day itself, as a lot of the viewers at World Premiere. So it's gonna be a very fun cast in the sense of it being me learning on the fly and ideating interactions on the fly with the viewers. So hold on to your seats as well as I try my best to expound what's going on the table during the games.
So, it's interesting, right? Because on one side, we collectively demonstrated, because we got the heavy hitter set early in
Yes.
Queenstown, and we, at least to my knowledge, didn't spoil anything. So you, at least, have demonstrated that you have the ability to sit on quote unquote IP and not leak it. So I'm a little surprised they didn't give it to you. On the other hand, the coolest experience I've had in my 30 plus years of gaming was getting a box of cards and having to build a deck out of it and then go play with it. So I actually understand from like the James White like crazy brew why he wants you to not have any idea what you're talking about while you're casting it. And I use not have any idea what you're talking about with air quotes, but there's some excitement around that, right?
There is. I think I'm just happy to see that people are all this spoiler season, just as like a little small note, was so fun because we got a lot of the commons and rares out earlier. A lot of the content creators got the Majestics after seeing like the kind of like the core units, right? The commons and rares usually make like the identity of the deck a little bit. You get an understanding of what's going on. And by the time we get to Japan itself, almost everything will be out. Just a couple of like the fables will be kind of missing. It's very similar to what we did in Queenstown because when we were playing I don't know what they called it, but like blocked constructed, like we only used a solo. They called it solo.
Yeah,
right?
solo. Good. Yeah, you're right. Yep.
Yeah, we called it solo, and we got to show so many of these new cards while the games were going on.
So cool.
Before the column itself. Cool. That was so fun. Yeah, that was so fun, right? I feel like this season, because we got to see the Blitz decks in action first, it gave us an idea of what these new cards might be, how the games might go, and then by the time we hit World Premiere, all the Majestics will be out, and then like, whoa, you just hit the ground running, and people have an idea of how to pilot these decks.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah, awesome. And it's funny you say that because as soon as you and I get done recording, I'm actually putting the finishing edits on my spoiler video that's going to go live for me as of the time of recording in about 9 hours. So I'm toe on the line, but it's been a busy week and I got to get her done. So either way, no one cares about that because this will go up actually after that. But again, I really want to thank you for this, and I want to turn it over to you for any shout outs or anything you want to give before we call it a day.
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, thanks for having me. First and foremost, I think it was just a wonderful time. I love these conversations with you because you really know how to pick out the right questions and just like flow with the conversation. That's always appreciated. For all the viewers, thanks for listening. I know I'm a pretty rambly guy, so appreciate y'all putting up with that. Lastly, I just want to shout out, you guys can check out our videos on OneTwoJuice. We also have a spoiler card coming out. We usually have a spoiler card most seasons, so thanks LSS for that. Otherwise, I will be casting at World Premiere Tokyo and the Tokyo Calling itself, so do tune in for those. It's going to be a fun weekend of Sealed and seeing these new heroes at play. So thanks for that.
Awesome. Yeah, and I met so Elliot was the one who I bonded with the most out of the trio, but I saw them. So we were on a boat, literally on a boat, coming back from. So we got on a boat. There was snacks and wine, and then we drove to a place and had a buffet dinner and wine. We were there for like 3 hours. Some sheep got sheared, and then we drove back, and there was some more wine. And these jokers and Flake of 983 Media, or whatever he calls it these days, we're at the middle of, I don't know what they call it in a boat. It's probably got a technical term, but you guys were I should say you folks, because one of you is not a guy, right? But you folks were just lighting up the room and everyone was enjoying your presence, and go check them out. They're an absolute pleasure, all of them. But Elliot was one who I bonded with the most, and really good dude. And I'm really glad to see you in the place that you are in terms of growing with LSS, and I'm pretty sure that's probably not going to stop. So congratulations on what you've done, and again, thank you for all of this.
No, thank you so much, Andrew. It was so nice, and thanks for having me on the cast, man. I've been watching your videos for the longest time, and to appear in one now, that's That's always crazy.
Yeah. Well, this is episode 501, by the way. That's not true because the spoiler video with 501. It's 502. Sorry, 502.
Wow.
But yeah,
Amazing,
we just hit 500.
amazing.
Anyway,
Congratulations
we're
on that.
boring our casters or our viewers, not our casters, because I'm still here. But we're viewing our boring our viewers at this point. But again, I wanted to thank you, and you got to say it with my friend. Go Commando.
Go Commando.